Hi, everybody. My name is Troy Mikanovich, and I'm here with another installment of the CWR 7-minute video series. This time here to talk to you a little bit about refining your research questions. If this is your first time joining us, we had a previous video on how to design a research question, starting from planning a project, kind of what considerations you have to think about, and then narrowing down your question by testing potential questions, kind of preliminary things you should ask yourself, and ways of framing and reframing potential lines of inquiry. Today, though, we're going to be talking about evaluating your potential research questions, and we're actually going to work backwards by imagining the thesis statements that you might come up with as you answer this research question. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship between a research question and like a social problem or a specific kind of research problem that you're trying to articulate, so that you can reframe your research question as statements of purpose once it gets towards writing proposals, maybe for grants, or writing your actual project. As with last time, there is a worksheet that you can follow along with. It will be included, a link will be included with the video. It's the same worksheet from the first video as well. So first, it's important to think about your project in context. This is something I touched on a little bit last time, but the idea that your research question that you're asking about some particular topic, some particular subtopic, is not kind of in a vacuum. It does not exist apart from other conversations. So one way I like to think about it is that there is ongoing dialogue about your topic, and that your contribution has to somehow connect to that ongoing dialogue. So the first way to think about that maybe is to think about your research question and what it will inspire, namely an answer. Through your research, you'll hope to answer your research question. And that's what we call thesis statement, right? Some sort of a statement of purpose or the main argument for your project. A useful kind of mnemonic to think about how research questions can be effective, or how to make them as effective as you can, is think about your research question should be safe, so that it should be significant, argumentative, it should be focused, and it should be evidence-based. These things don't quite mean much on their own, so let's reframe those into a series of questions that you can ask yourself about your question and its potential answer to see if you're on the right track. So if you are thinking that your research question is significant, you're really saying that it should have consequence. There should be consequences for answering this question. So imagine what would happen if this question was never asked or answered. That's like the Miracle on 34th Street version of designing a research question. And then what are the actual consequences, academic consequences, social, practical, theoretical, of the different answers that you might get? So you have to do a little bit of hypothesizing. In terms of the argument, this is where you really start to interrogate what is the existing debate and scholarship around your topic and the questions you're asking about. So what are the different positions and answers that could be facilitated by your question, right? Does your question have enough room for debate? And can researchers reasonably argue about how to interpret the data that you're working with? So what are the ways that researchers will be able to debate over the answer to your question? A focused research question is really the trickiest one because it's about its scope. And so rather than saying that it should be big or small, I just like to think that you're intentional with the size of the question that you're asking. So think about the other themes that your question is touching on. What are the consequences of narrowing or broadening that inquiry? And are you pulling on any strings that you just aren't ready methodologically, let's say, to deal with? When we talk about the evidence-based nature of a research question, it just needs to be supportable by data. It needs to be explainable. So what kinds of data do you need to answer this question? Where are you going to get the data? And then how are you going to interpret it, right? So sourcing that data, then analyzing it are two separate prospects. But of course, these research questions, they don't just exist in a vacuum in our minds apart from kind of academic scholarship, but they're oftentimes tied to social problems or a broader kind of social phenomenon that we want to talk about as well. So here's kind of a useful circle to think about, that there's a relationship in some way between practical problems, the research questions we're asking about them, the way that those research questions turn into specific research problems, the way we answer that research, and then that tells us something about the problem. And this is again from Wayne C. Booth's and Gregory Cullum's The Craft of Research, but this is a useful kind of framework to imagine that practical problems are motivating kind of our abstraction of a research question. We have to operationalize that research question into a specific problem, and then we answer that problem to give us a way to solve a practical problem. Now, the way that this is useful for us is to think about Well, what if you turn your question and the beginning of your project into a statement of purpose, a purpose statement that's established to the intent of this study and research, and it describes in some way the design, like how are you actually thinking about this question, how are you going to go about answering it. So this is from John Cresswell's Research Design, and he gives a useful just model for answering this. So the purpose of this blank, this study, will be to understand or explore the central phenomenon being studied for such and such context. At this stage in the research, the phenomenon will be defined as blank. So it's kind of like academic Mad Libs. And I provided here at the end a useful model to look at. Right, so here's an example from R.A. Rhodes's The Implications of the Growing Visibility of Gay and Bisexual Male Students on Campus. That's from 2014. And here's their statement of purpose. They say, the article contributes to the literature addressing the needs of gay and bisexual students by identifying several areas where progress can be made in improving the campus climate for them. So the paper derives from a 2-year ethnographic study of subcultures composed of gay and bisexual males at a large research university. And then they clarify that the focus on men, it reflects the fact that lesbian and bisexual women constitute a separate student subculture. So if we see how this maps on to the model above, first they identify specifically the kind of research that they are doing, and then they articulate the specific kind of drive behind it. It's identifying several areas where progress can be made in improving campus climate for these students. It gives a specific claim to the methodology, and then at the end it kind of defines its terms, saying, well, this is actually how we're considering gay and bisexual culture in this context, and it's really, really tied to the specific context of the university that they're looking at. So one thing I think that'll be helpful as you continue to develop your research questions is start to work backwards. Think of them as thesis statements in the making, and then think of how you might then expand this project into a statement of purpose as a way to evaluate the kinds of questions that you're asking. Here are the references that we've used so far. As always, thank you for joining me here today. Feel free to go back and check out that earlier video and check out any other videos we have on the website. Okay, be safe. Bye-bye.